Kelvin and I are talking about a year of rest. And so it's an interesting thing. If you look in the Bible in the Old Testament, part of God's design for living in the promised land was that every seventh year was supposed to be a Sabbath year, supposed to be a year of rest where they were not planting and sowing in their fields, harvesting. It says they could, reap what just grew of itself, but they weren't actively going and working their land. And it's interesting, later on, they actually get kicked out of the promised land because they didn't give it its years of rest. And I find the connection very interesting. God calls the promised land, he calls it my rest. They did not enter into my rest or my promised land. And we're going to talk today just about the connection of, God's promises and rest. But where did this all come from? So several years ago, I've got a book called The Miracle Year. And I had a year where I felt like God showed me this is going to be a miracle year. And I went through that, and it really was a miracle year in a lot of different ways. And on the backside of that, I felt like God said, now we're launching into a miracle decade. And I began to set a much bigger vision for just the Abundant Life Training Center, what we're doing here. And I felt like God was saying it's going to be a 10-year vision. A bigger vision is going to help hopefully have a big impact. And so from that point till now, it's been almost just 2 weeks away now from being 6 years. And a couple of months ago, I was telling Kelvin, I really felt like I was getting the nudge from God that it was supposed to be the next year, 2026 coming up, was supposed to be a year of rest, where I wasn't supposed to work on it anymore. And that was a total perspective shift for me. We had to very quickly pivot a lot of things that we were doing, and we had to go into basically preparation mode. You think about just the pattern of the Sabbath, 6 on, 1 off. Well, the day before the Sabbath in the Jewish culture is called preparation day, is what it's called. Well, we've been in preparation mode now for, I don't know, what, 2 months maybe? Something like that, of pivoting and shifting and preparing, where it's been an interesting paradigm shift for me of how can I get this thing set up where it can not only run without me, it can grow without me. It can grow without us actively sowing into it on a consistent basis, which means we had some work to do. We had some preparation to do to set up the systems for it to be functioning in that realm. And it's a really interesting thing to think about. What if you set up your life in such a way that you had to take every seventh year as a year of rest? How would that change your perspective on what you're doing? That was God's model for living in the promised land. How would that shift your perspective? But Kelvin, I don't know what's we've been working.
Dan, that's like I said, when you talked about it, I was like, I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't thinking about that in those terms. But yet, it makes sense to just look at how, God's operating system is not that we go and make the operating system, we follow his system. And I think our first nudge was are you sure you're hearing this right? Are you sure we need to take a year off? But yet, over the last couple months since we've talked about it, I've been getting a lot of peace about it. That, okay, timing wise, it seems to fit. Um, Definitely put some work into creating a self-running program, the new you for the next year. So I think timing wise, as always, God's never early, he's never late, he's always on time. And I think for us, this is a divine appointment, it's a divine time.
Yeah. when if you think about it, the question the people had, or God, preempted their question. He said, "You're going to ask me, I'm not sowing and harvesting my land. What am I going to eat in that seventh year?" And he said, "I'm going to give you more than enough at the end of the sixth year, where it sustains you through the eighth year or maybe even the ninth year." And it's this idea, I think, that when we enter into God's rest, God told the people, "My Sabbaths will be a sign for you. They will be a sign for you that it's me doing the work. It's going to be a remembrance of our covenant." Think about Chick-fil-A. They close on Sundays, and yet they produce more revenue per location than just about any other fast food business that there is. And they do it in 6 days where everybody else is open 7. It's a sign. It's a signal saying, hey, God's doing something here. And so I think it can be a similar thing. Now let's talk about a couple of different things that I've learned about rest. So a couple years ago, we had a message for the year called the Great Reset. And that's where I feel like God really began to reinforce to me the importance of rest. Because I was actually working building some property management business. And it was like the business just never shut off. I mean, you got people calling you all times of the day, weekends, holidays, it doesn't matter. It's always on. And at the time, it was really just me working in it. I was trying to build something, and it never shut off. I skipped vacations, I skipped days off. I was getting burned out because I wasn't taking my rest. And what I learned is that when you actually take the time to rest, it's like a reset for your system. You think about a computer that's been running for too long and you need to reboot it. Well, your body needs a little reset from time to time. And we can do it on God's rhythms. And so what I learned is that your body actually becomes more responsive to nutrition, to your workouts, to training, all kinds of things like that. You start to hear more clearly from God because it's like your receptors have been reset and cleaned out a little bit, resensitized. And so many benefits that came out of that. And what I started to do during that time is I started to make sure to prioritize taking one day off a week. Like I started to put a boundary around that in my life. Like I got to do this. It's going to look like things are competing against it, but I gotta put this in place. And then the other thing I started doing is up until that point, I had been producing daily communion meditations. I had done it for a couple years, maybe 3 years up to that point, something like that. And I've been putting them out every single day, like I don't know, over 1,000 of them at that point. And I felt like God was saying, we're going to take a day off once a week. And then I also want you to take a week off every seventh week. And so I started backing off every seventh week. And I found that that was a great reset. And I started implementing that rhythm into the communion meditations, but I also started putting that into my workouts, where I basically do 6 weeks of training and really try to focus six days a week for 6 weeks. And then in the seventh week, I back off and I mostly just walk and I do mobility and stretching. And I move, but I don't do any kind of serious training during that week. I give my body a chance to rest. And what I found is I actually made more progress doing that than I was doing training every day, all the time. The tendency is to think you're going to go backwards because you're slowing down on some of the things that you're doing, but I actually made more progress. And so I started to learn the value and the importance of a rest and a reset. Just what it does for your clarity, what it does for your energy, what it does for your metabolism, what it does for so many different things. But the other thing is that when you come back to it, you have the desire and the motivation and the eagerness to get back to it again. It restores that hunger, that desire to get back to work and do those things. And so I think we really need that balance of
Right.
work and rest in our life. And you think about Jesus, he says, I came to give you rest. Think about Psalm 23. He says, he makes me lie down. He came to give you rest.
Well, Dan, I like that. And I think I need to tweak something I'm doing based off of what you just said.
Mm,
But it's kind of cool because, some of you know from our stories and blogs before, but I'm a section hiker on the Appalachian Trail. And I'm up around 1,300 miles, so I still have a good ways to go. But I rigorously prepare for about 140, 150-mile hike every year. And in between, I do some smaller hikes to reach my goal, more like 40 on a weekend. And my adult children join me on those. But it's so cool because here I am training all year to do this section because I got to carry a 30-pound backpack. I'm in really tough areas, climbing, you name it. It's it's one of the hardest things I do with the most rewards of what I do as far as physical nature goes. But I have found that it takes me about all year to get ready and stay ready. But I get back, I so look forward to that rest, and it's a time of reflection. It's a time of letting my body heal. It's a time of all these things you were talking about, Dan. And it works. And I don't get hurt while I'm out there. I've been staying healthy and at age 67, man, I'm going strong. But here's the other thing. Because of the way I'm managing this, my health is vibrant.
mhm.
Other areas are vibrant as a payoff for what I'm trying to do. So it's holistically working for me in other areas too. And I think if we think about it, and as we do these things, and especially if you're getting ready to do something, make a change, make something happen in your life, think about how it's going to affect the rest of your life. And Dan, it's so cool because I've watched you for years, but everything you do has benefits to your family. It has benefits to the goals that you just set up as one to leave an inheritance to your children. It has all of these things that play off of you staying centrally plugged in and healthy with it.
Yeah.
You don't get obsessive. You stay balanced. And that's what I'm hearing. We've got to be balanced, and part of that balance is our rest.
Well, I once I have had an engineering friend, and I once asked him, we were working on some projects actually, and I asked him, I said, what happens in nature if something gets unbalanced? And he said, well, actually, it doesn't really happen because if something gets unbalanced in nature, it blows up. It blows up. And so if you got something that's causing major pain that's blowing up in your life, there's probably a good chance that something's out of balance. And so I want to talk about one of the things that you just touched on. When you rested, your body had a chance to heal. Well, think about this for a second. This is in my book, The Lord Who Heals You. Healing comes out of rest. Most of the healing accounts in the Gospels where Jesus healed somebody, a high number of them actually happened on the Sabbath. And it was one of the biggest issues that the religious leaders had is that he was healing people on the Sabbath. Healing comes out of rest. Now let's talk about another aspect of rest. It says, I think it's in Exodus, that God, created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested and he was refreshed. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. God never gets tired, right? He's always working. He never grows weary. Why was God refreshed? Wait a minute. What's going on here? God was refreshed. Well, if God needed to be refreshed, how much more do we? How much more do we? Now, the way I approach a Sabbath now is I think about, people ask, what do you do on a Sabbath day? What do you do? And the way I think about it personally now is this: what refreshes me? What refreshes me? And I think that's going to be a little different for everybody. Maybe for you, it's taking a nap. Maybe for you, it's reading a book. Maybe it's, spending time worshiping or praying or connecting with God. Maybe for you, like for me, one of the things is like, I like to play sports. We go play tennis or golf or racquetball or bowling or something like that. That gives me energy. Going and spending time with, people you care about. Like Kelvin and I, we were go have some lunch together. Like that's energizing. I walk
Mhm.
out of there feeling refreshed. What we're doing right now, we walk out of here feeling refreshed. What refreshes you? For Kelvin, it might be going for a hike. For somebody else, it might be something different. What refreshes you? I think you want to figure out what that is, and you can use it as an avenue to connect with God as well. Like Kelvin being out in nature, going for a hike, probably feels pretty connected with God at the same time. Now, another important concept I want to talk about is something I just learned in the last week, which is we had a communion meditation that we just put out recently. It says, where does grace come from? I felt like God asked me that question recently. Where does grace come from? Well, in John chapter 1, I think it says, out of his fullness, out of the fullness of Jesus, we've all received grace upon grace. So grace comes out of fullness. Grace comes out of fullness. So we receive grace out of God's fullness. But for us, one of our mandates is to give other people the same grace God has given us. Well, in order to do that, we got to be full.
Yes.
We can't give grace to other people if we're not walking in fullness. We receive that fullness from Him that's in Christ, and then that grace can flow out of us as well. Now, there's one more concept I want to tie into that. I've got a friend who's Jewish, and he taught me about this tradition that they have in the Jewish culture called Havdalah. Havdalah is something that they do typically on every Sabbath day. They do it on the day of rest. They do it on the backside at the end of the Sabbath, right before they're getting ready to go back into their week of work. And what they do is they take a cup and it's sitting on a saucer and they pour wine into that cup until it overflows onto the saucer. He said they do it pretty much every Sabbath. And he said the symbolism is this: the wine represents God's blessings that he's pouring into you. You're the cup. He's pouring his blessings into you until you're full, till you're overflowing. And the saucer represents the people that you touch, the people around you in your life. And out of that fullness, it's supposed to overflow. God's blessings are supposed to overflow out of you into the people that you touch, into the people that are around you. And they do this every week on the Sabbath as a reminder. Well, I think it's very interesting that they do it on the Sabbath because it's out of that fullness, out of the rest, out of the fullness that comes of rest, it overflows out of you. I'll let Kelvin run with it now.
And how often does that sound counterintuitive?
Yeah.
It really is. It just, but I love the idea of the symbolism, um, the obedience that is required out of us, that, hey, I'm going to give this extra as a symbol. And then what does God do with that? He blesses us. He lets our life overfill, just like you said. I just love that. That was such a a really good, I'm a visual person. I like stories and you hit all the connectors for me. And I just hope people will just take a moment to slow down and really soak that in because I think that has a lot of value.
Yeah.
How the next few steps in their life can be and how as they're trying to make some changes or whatever's going on that it doesn't have to be 7 days a week. It really doesn't. It can be six. It can be maybe less, but it can be done in a more gracious way than just wide open the entire time.
So let's talk about, because I don't want people to take it out of context, I guess. Um, what is my plan? What am I going to be doing for a year? Well, I think the number one mandate for me is kind of taking my hands off of, for us to get everything prepared and ready and kind of take my hands off of what we're doing with the Abundant Life Training Center, to let it run and to have it set up where people can be going through it and hopefully growing and seeing transformation with that. But I've got other responsibilities. I've got, married, got kids, got, you know, things to do. So I don't think it's going to be a scenario where I'm just sitting on the couch all day long. I think I'd go crazy doing that actually. But I think it's looking for, obviously slowing down a little bit, making sure to connect more deeply with God, looking to connect with people more, prioritizing fellowship, as a key, so with my family, with friends, with connections, just prioritizing and then looking to do things that refresh me. I like to learn, I like to study, I like to read, um, to listen to things. I like to, I owned a gym business for years. I like to move and do physical things. I'll probably still be working out during that year, but my plan is to try to do it in an even more gentle way. Um, I'm really emphasizing God doing the work through me as I'm doing my workouts and trying to take the effort and strain out of it, which is, the athlete mentality that Kelvin and I have had for years. It's hard to break that a little bit sometimes.
Mhm.
But I've learned more and more, the more we kind of rest in our soul and let God do the work in our workouts, the better things tend to go too. So,
Well, and this is a step of faith.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a step of faith. And I think the clarity for me is, I just retired recently, a little over a year ago. And I kind of got out of that daily grind, but yet I'm finding myself as busy as I've ever been.
Mhm.
My days are full, my time is full, but it's just things have shifted, you know? Things have shifted more. I have 7 grandbabies, I have a vibrant family. We have this business that God put us together on over a year ago. So there's some really awesome things that God just takes us where we're at. And that's what I like. I could have been working and then we do this and I would have just been in a different season of life. And yeah, I say that because I don't know where the people listening to this are in their life, but he takes you right where you're at. He takes you and says, "Hey, have faith, trust me, walk in my ways."
Mhm.
And I think we're just trying to show you that this is a way you can elevate your life, and that is rest on occasion. That it doesn't have to be nonstop. it doesn't have to wear you down to a pulp. And when I worked, I had 400 employees, and I would see some of the folks that when they were done working with me, they had another job. Some of them even had another job, and they were trying so hard to get ahead. And I just don't recall seeing many of them succeed. It seemed like, if nothing else, they failed because what they were trying to get ahead on, they just spent more. They didn't save more, they spent more, or they did this or they did that, but but the real issue was they were spending themselves to the point that they just didn't have anything left to give. And you could see them almost turn into a zombie at work. And I'm like going, who wants to be like that?
Yeah. So I actually had, I'm glad you brought that up. I actually had a number of trainers in my gym that were personal trainers that were trying to really get their personal training business going, get established as a personal trainer. And, any new business, it takes some time to get things going. And I saw it over and over is that these trainers, they wouldn't quite be making it yet. And so they'd go get a second job or a third job or whatever it was. And all that would happen is their training would fall off even more. They would never succeed at it. And what I learned through that is that I think if they would have just put the focus in where they are and made the most out of what they were currently doing, I think it would have taken off and been more than enough. But instead, they went a different route and they exhausted themselves. Now they had nothing left to give. They were not operating out of fullness anymore. And it detracted from where they really wanted to go.
Yeah.
Is something I saw. Now, one more disclaimer I want to put out there. It's like I said, my plan is to take a year off from this particular what we're doing with this stuff. Kelvin and I have talked about we might do some blogs. I don't know just yet. We might put out a couple videos just because we find it refreshing. We find it fun
Yeah.
to do that. But I feel like this is something God specifically has instructed me to do. That doesn't mean it's for you. For a lot of people, if you went and told your boss, I'm not working this year, probably not going to go so good for you. So you need to seek God personally about what he has for you and his timing for you and what you're supposed to be doing. What he tells me is not always relevant for you. Put that disclaimer out there. I don't want anybody to take it out of context, but
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, Dan, I used to do a lot of goal setting with my team. And part of the goal setting was I would tell them that, hey, we can make a lot of things happen if we get focused. And but what I would set up for them was something a little different. It was based off of three areas: their spiritual life, their professional life, and their personal life. Sound familiar, three in one?
mm-hmm.
But I've seen where people have had a very centric focus on money, period. And over the years, they worked their fingers to the bone and they just provided income for their family, but they left out everything else. And here they are, wealthy at the end, but bankrupt in their personal life, bankrupt in their spiritual life, because they lost the focus and they just didn't understand what we're trying to say. And all they ended up with was bony fingers. I mean, they just really were miserable. But yet I've watched people do the same thing, very well balanced, make a decent income, and at the end, we're giving had their family thriving and able to help people go on mission trips or things because of the way God has blessed them. So it just, we're trying to say this is really holistic. This is, and it, as Dan said, it needs to be personal to you. Our stories are personal to us, and that's what we're sharing. We're sharing us. And we're hoping by doing that, you see that we're real, that we're loving people. We just want to help. God's called us to be a life coach.
Yeah.
And so it's really, where is God got you? And hopefully if you're listening today, you're at a place where maybe something's going to resonate with you. And we're hoping that. And then we'll kind of finish up too that, we have a program called The New You, where we just take you right where you're at. Most of the work's been done for you in the program where, it's laid out very systematically for you to study and just take you where you're at today and go, hey, you've been wanting a little bit more out of life. You've been wanting to turn some corners on some things. You've been stuck in this long enough. And I feel like the new you is a way to get unstuck. And I hope what you're hearing in us is, we've lived it. We've been stuck. We've hit our heads against the wall. We've been stonewall. We've been this, we've been that. But yet God kept taking us where we were at and getting us through it. And we're hoping we're sharing with you the trials and errors that we've been through and the things that have God's placed in our heart and has matured us as Christians.
Well, and I would say we've said we've been preparing, we've been pivoting what we were doing, and we've got what we think, and we've been praying about it the whole way. God, help us to set this thing up the way you want it set up before this year ends.
Amen.
And we're about there. We're
Yep.
pretty much, well, when this video goes out, as we're recording it, we're probably a couple days away, but by the time this video goes out, we'll be there, I believe.
Yep.
And we've got a program called the New You. And on the backside of the New You, we're going to help you install some rhythms of rest. We're going to help you install some rhythms of rest and some just God rhythms in your life and help you create that balance across your life. Not just in rest, but in all the different areas of life. That's really one of the big goals of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with the New You, which is a 40-day program, very transformational, help get you unstuck in some areas, I believe, and really just start you on an amazing journey with God, has been our experience.
Yeah. And the beauty of that is, if you like that, the programming goes on for the next year.
Yeah.
And each step along the way, you can continue with us or you can always cancel with zero issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you get plugged into the new you and you find out that, wow, this has been transformational, you'll be excited to see what Make Today a Masterpiece can be and many of the other things that are in there for the next year that can transform so many areas of the life
Yeah.
that we're in.
Yeah.
And I'm excited that, if you join us, it's going to be exciting. I think you're going to find out that the new you can be very transformational and very pivotal. You can make an immediate pivot in your life. You don't have to just keep wondering, how do I make the corner? How do I turn this? How do I make it get better? I think in a very short period of time, at least in my and Dan's opinion, things can change quickly and things can be looking a whole lot better in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look forward to, at the end of the next year, us recording another video to tell what we learned
Amen.
about a year of rest. So we look forward to seeing you guys in our next video, whenever that is.
Yeah. And where do they sign up if they want to, Dan?
They can go to abundantlifetrainingcenter.com.
Okay.